If this is the first webinar that you've been on from the NextAfter Institute, I just want to share a little bit about our mission and our focus. Our mission is to decode what works in online fundraising to make it as accessible to you as possible so that you can do the day-to-day work to actually see generosity grow. Some of the ways that we do this is we conduct research like the report that you're about to see. From this research, we will tease these things out into actual practical resources to help you grow your fundraising in a practical way. We also turn these into training. These can be courses, they can be workshops, they can even be our annual conference, the NEO Summit. So ways that you can start to build your skills to become a more effective digital-first fundraiser. Now, again, our two speakers for today, Brady Josephson, who manages the NextAfter Institute, will be sharing what we've been learning through this global online fundraising scorecard. And then Mia Rodriguez is a senior product manager at Salesforce, and she's going to share a little bit about why they commissioned this study. So Mia, are you there?
I am.
All right, I'll hand it to you. Can you tell us a little bit about why you commissioned the study and what the value is of this report to a fundraiser?
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, everyone, Brady and Nathan. I'd love to talk about, why we at Salesforce decided to fund the study, and particularly why we chose NextAfter to be our research partner. So in terms of why we commissioned the study, we really wanted to put ourselves in the shoes of the donor and understand what a donor goes through when making a donation. But we're calling these folks mystery donors because we wanted to be those mystery donors and go through and analyze and experience actually making a donation, interacting online with a nonprofit, and understanding how compelling an organization is with their asks and the experience that they give us as donors. There are many providers of digital solutions, right? Salesforce is also a provider of digital solutions to help nonprofits really propel their fundraising. And this work really works in conjunction with those solutions that a company can provide you to help you understand how you can put those solutions and tools to work in a way that's best for your organization. This is very much like, I used to work in consumer packaged goods for a long time. I worked at Clorox, I worked for Mars Chocolate, and we had this concept of mystery shoppers, as many of you are familiar, where you go into a Starbucks and you order a coffee in secret and you figure out how good the service is or not. This is very much akin to that, but in the digital world. So I was extremely thrilled with the way this research was done, because that can be a very powerful way to get insights into how an organization is working. A little bit about why we chose NextAfter. So if you go to NextAfter's website, they say this quote, and I quote, "We are obsessed with understanding what inspires people to give." And that really is a testament to what they do, really understanding who our donors are, which are really the most important piece of this puzzle in many ways. They've analyzed over 500 email signups, over 500 online donations, and have come up with this tremendous piece of work, all these tremendous insights that I really think will help us as an industry think about how we can best create our online presence to make sure that donors are engaged and to make sure that our donations are impactful. So glad that all of you are here, excited about this piece of work. It's the first sneak peek into the research. So I'm so glad that all of you could join. Thank you for having me, and over to you, Nathan and Brady.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mia. I'm not Nathan, I'm Brady. I just didn't, expand into being. And I'm going to take over from here. We're going to share some of that research that Mia talked about, and looking at these 9 different countries and that mystery style of approach for research. So I got good news and bad news for you. It's a little bit of each. One, as Mia said, you're the first people to ever see this in its entirety. I did a sneak peek for France earlier. Mia has seen some of this, but no one else has seen this. So you're the first ones, and that's kind of cool and unique. The downside is I'm not exactly sure how good this is. So I'd love for you to provide feedback afterwards and let us know how this presentation could be improved and optimized. All right, so we went about this study. Here's a few of the key details. There were 630 organizations included. 50% of them came from social services and international, and the vast majority were medium to large size. So revenues over $5 million all over the country, all over the world, right? We went out and we made $20 USD donations or equivalent. So it was 20 euros, it was $25 in Australia, it was 250 Mexican pesos, and 50 Brazilian reais, which is very fun to say. And we went out and made those donations to each of those organizations. We also signed up for 535 email lists, starting from the homepage. And the donor and the email had different emails, different email addresses, different names, so we could track them separately to see how organizations were treating the donor compared to the subscriber. So you'll see online donor and email subscriber. Those are two different people, two different experiences. Then we tracked all the emails we received for 90 days. In total, there was 5,976 emails. And we classified each of those emails in two ways. One, it was either a solicitation, where the main perceived purpose of that email was to ask us for money, ask someone to give financially, or a cultivation. So that was anything else. Newsletters, blog posts, reports, impacts, everything else that wasn't financially related was classified as a cultivation. We had 1 to 10 independent researchers, so not us, review those emails and tell us what they thought it was. So again, trying to be in the shoes of the donor. And again, this was through 9 different countries and 4 different languages. And the report will be available to you first thing tomorrow. So again, huge thanks for Salesforce, who are the only reason why we're able to do this study. And then the other key thing is, I don't speak those languages. So we actually partnered with different agencies around the world in local countries who A, spoke the language, B, knew the local markets, and C, had an address or a credit card within that country. So we could, as best we can, pretend to be that donor or email subscriber. So PROA helped us in Mexico and Brazil, Traction on Demand in Canada, Donor Republic in Australia, Mindwise in the Netherlands, Institute for Sustainable Philanthropy in the UK, Opening in France, and Get Unique in Germany. So big thanks to all of them for their help. All right, enough context, let's get into it. So here's the goal. How do we get ideas? How do we get insights to improve and optimize our fundraising? And you're gonna see basically 3 different ways to do it. One is compare yourself to your own country. So I'm guessing you're from the US, maybe Canada, but if it's a different country, you can compare yourself to those countries within the country. 2, compare across countries. So if you're in Canada, what are they doing in the Netherlands that you could possibly learn from? And 3rd, we're gonna share some of our own experiments from the research library. So real tests, real experiments with real nonprofit organizations to say what we think works when it comes to digital marketing and online fundraising. So one example of how this works, you'll see a data point like this. We actually went to donation pages and said, how many different types of payment methods are they accepting? One of them that we looked at is EFT or ABM, ACH, some way to give via my bank account. And in the United States, about 27% of organizations had some way for you to give via your bank directly on the form or online. So now if you're in the US, you might be saying, okay, that's less than a third. Maybe we don't do it, but we're in the majority. So maybe we don't actually have to do it. Should you do that? Should you not do it? I don't know. You can benchmark yourself against the US. But then if we kind of zoom back and look at what are other countries doing, you can start to see this type of chart where some countries like the UK and Germany in particular are almost at 100% acceptance for something like giving via bank on their donation form. And a country like the Netherlands, which looked a little low, actually has this payment processor called Ideal, which 89% of organizations accept, which is basically a way to give via bank. And so now you can see that, yes, here's the global average of which the United States is below, but look at some of these countries that have almost 100% adoption of this type of payment method. So now maybe you kind of lean in and be like, okay, what are they doing and what do they know that we don't? And then the other thing is we'll show these experiments. And luckily we have an experiment where this organization wondered that very thing. What is the actual impact of adding giving via bank account to our donation form? So they ran a test. They added bank account method. You can see you can put in your routing account and confirm your account. And what they found is that by adding this, they actually improved lifetime value 55%. Now, often you can only give via bank if you're making a recurring donation. So this is increasing donor retention for recurring donors, 55%, and no negative difference between the 2 forms. We know from other recurring giving research that by giving via bank, it actually improves donor retention 4% for recurring donors, which is a big thing for recurring donors. So now maybe should you look into that? Does your form allow you to do that? And maybe this is something that you should do. So that's just kind of one little example of a data point and how I hope you use this presentation as well as the report. All right, so let's get into these 8 different ways. Number 1, test your forms, please. Test your integrations, test your systems. It seems like a very simplistic kind of key point to have in such an expansive research study. But the reality is we could not successfully sign up for email 27% of the time, and we could not complete a donation 20% of the time. Just let that sink in for a second. That's what we're trying to do, is sign up and donate, and a bunch of the time we actually couldn't. Now, we experienced significant issues in both Brazil and Mexico. One of the reasons is on the donation side, they would accept only PayPal, whereas our research methodology is to give via credit card. So Brazil and Mexico aren't like impossible to give to, but our research methodology didn't line up with how they accept payments. That was a big thing. Plus, a bunch just did not accept online donations at all. So even if you remove these two outliers, and you'll see in the report and a lot of our analysis, we don't actually talk a lot about Brazil and Mexico because the data side, the data set or the sample is too small to make real strong inferences into how fundraising is done in Brazil and Mexico. So even if we kind of remove them, we're still talking about a 92% success rate for online giving and an 83% success rate for email sign up. So we still could not give 1 out of 10 times and could not sign up 2 out of 10 times. Now, the reasons for this, 90% of the time on the email sign up, we just couldn't find it. It just didn't exist. We couldn't find it. And on the donation side, there was often like a broken form, a broken link. We'd get the spinning wheel of death and the page just wouldn't load. So this is why we're saying test your donation pages and email systems. France, on the other side, had the highest success rate for both email sign up and donation. So that was only one part of the study, was signing up. But then when we flip over and started receiving communications, we also experienced some kind of brokenness. 27% of organizations did not send our email subscriber any emails at all over the 3 months, over the 90 days. And 17% did not send the online donor any emails of any type over the 90 days. In the US, this was 18%, no emails to subscriber, 7%, no emails to donor. So there's still some room to improve. No one was 100% across the board, and this is like table stakes. This is the starting point. Can you just complete a form? So test your forms and see if they're working. All right, when it comes to getting email signups, idea number 2 here is you have to offer value in exchange for an email and communicate it. So when we looked at the email signup offer, we tried to assess its kind of strength. And we found that 3 out of 4 organizations did not provide an average or strong reason to sign up. And half the time, it wasn't even clear what we were signing up for. So you might be asking, well, like, how do you determine average or strong or clear? Well, we borrowed this framework from the folks at Mech Labs, and this is one way to think about why you would want to sign up for something in the first place, or they call value proposition or net force. So when we look at the value force factor, there's really 2 things that contribute to why I or why you or why your ideal donor or supporter would want to do something. One is appeal. This is like, why do I want this in the first place? And one is exclusivity, is why can I only get this with you, or where else can I get this? So we would actually score email signup offers based off this criteria, appeal and exclusivity. So step into the shoes of the researcher here for a second. I'm going to show you some examples from the Netherlands, and you're going to be the researcher, and you can even chat in the scores that you would do. So we've got options A and options B here, and then option C over here. These are different newsletter sign-up forms that we would look at and analyze as a researcher. So at first, we're going to score A and B. You can do this on paper. You can do this in chat. Just do it in your mind. But how much do you want to get one of these emails? 0 being like low, 2 being like, I desperately need this. And then how exclusive is this? Can you get this anywhere else in the world? Low exclusivity, or this is very, very unique to that organization. That would be high exclusivity. 0, 1, or 2, 0, 1, or 2. And then maybe on this side, I'll actually read some of this out. Headline, be the first to get the latest news. Nothing is more changeable than nature. There's an awful lot to see and learn. We are happy to help you with practical tips and current information. Forest rangers, volunteers, project leaders, and ecologists know exactly what's going on below. You'll find an overview of our newsletters. And then they share one of the newsletters where their forest rangers are happy to help you on your way in the North Holland nature. They know the most beautiful places, know exactly where you can see which plants and animals. Sign up for our newsletter and receive great tips for going out, walking and cycling routes, excursions in the area, and special observations in nature. How would you score that one from 0 to 2 for appeal, 0 to 2 for exclusivity? And then what we do is we actually multiply those scores together to get this only you factor, or this overall kind of strength rating. Because if you desperately want something, but you can get it anywhere else, you can ignore it. If this is super, super exclusive, you can only get it here, but you don't want it, then it's useless. So these two factors are combined for this only you factor. And that's how we came up with this scoring from 0 to 4. And how we found that only a quarter of organizations in the world had an above average kind of reason why I should sign up for email. The UK was 6 out of 10 was kind of like the strongest in this area. So then the question that we ask, and you should be asking, is like, well, why? Why are organizations performing so poorly? And one of the things we found is everyone is pretty much offering a newsletter. 86% of organizations. The US was one of the least likely to offer a newsletter, but it was still over 70% of the time what was on offer. And we know from our research and testing that basically any other offer, in this case it was an online course, but an ebook, a petition, an email series, a daily drip, almost anything outperforms a newsletter. In this case, the online course helped drive 47% more emails than just a generic newsletter. So everyone's offering a newsletter. It's also, if everyone's offering it, then by definition, it's not overly exclusive. But then the other thing is, less than half the time, our researchers said, it's not even clear what I'm signing up for. And that's partly because very few organizations are using any copy or text. 62% used less than a sentence to try and communicate why I should sign up. So we've talked about the value, force, and appeal and exclusivity, but there's also this factor of clarity, this function of clarity. Do I just understand what I'm about to sign up for or what I would get? So if all you actually have is a newsletter, there are still ways to use some copy or text to improve the appeal, the exclusivity, and the clarity in that offer. And this experiment is awesome at showing that. So on the left, you can see the control. It says newsletter, and then one sentence and sign up now. And then the treatment has a bunch of different changes here to try to improve appeal, exclusivity, and clarity. So headline, newsletter, not super appealing, versus get uplifting stories, how you can shine hope in the US and around the world. Then you've got that one sentence on the left versus this real kind of key offer statement, right? Click below to get the latest news, updates, and invitations to exclusive events from Buckner. We'll send you spiritual encouragement, it's a faith-based organization, through our weekly faith-focused devotion. You won't find these stories and resources anywhere else. And then instead of sign up, which is work, it says get the updates, which is something that signifies value. They also use that in the headline. So same offer, you're signing up for a newsletter in each case, but one is positioned to highlight appeal, exclusivity, and clarity. 276% increase in emails acquired. This is part of the reason why the UK kind of outperformed other countries, is they would still offer newsletters, research newsletter, email newsletter. So, you know, maybe not the best, maybe kind of boring, but they more often would use copy like this, British Heart Foundation, Médecins Sans Frontières, to actually explain what you were getting. So the key idea here is if you want someone to sign up for email or take any action, they need a reason to do that. And you have to communicate that often via text. So then after we signed up for email, we looked at, well, what's the experience now? What are they asking us to do? And we found that 7 times out of 10, there was nothing for us to do. That was it. We signed up for email, virtual high five, and went on the rest of our way. And only 1 in 10 actually had nothing. There was no like confirmation. We weren't even sure if we were successful in completing the email sign up. So when we look at, you know, who's doing a next action or step, again, we kind of see that the UK was the most likely to have something for us to do. And social share or read something, blog post, ebook, something like that was the most common action. But still, very few organizations around the world and in the US are offering a next step. So why is that? The first thing is less than half of organizations are using like a dedicated confirmation page. So what I mean by that is, here's 2 examples from Germany. This is a same page experience. You find the form, you fill it out, you get this message, and my German is terrible, but it's like, thank you for signing up for the newsletter. We have an email and sent you a confirmation link. But that's it. You stay on the same page. It's just like this modal flip window. That's it. Versus a dedicated page like this, also from Germany, where if we kind of zoom in, they do a few different things. First, thank you for signing up for our newsletter. 2, details are in your inbox. You can make sure that you kind of opt in if it's a double opt-in. Here's some tips to avoid spam, put us on the whitelist. And then they have a clear call to action to make a donation. Jits online spenden, and absolutely butchered that. That means donate. So that's what they asked us to do. You can only really do that, thank, communicate, move to an action, if you have a dedicated page. It's also easier to track the number of signups if you have a dedicated page, as opposed to just like that modal kind of flip window. Now, it might be like counterintuitive perhaps to ask for a donation after an email, but there's this idea in behavioral economics called foot in the door technique, where basically if we take one little action or one step, we're actually a lot more open to taking a next step or a bigger action. So in this case, if by signing up for email and starting to move and take action, we're actually more likely to take a second action, possibly even a donation. If you've seen any of our courses or any of our stuff, we talk about this a lot because this is the model we use with our clients. Create an offer, generally not a newsletter, promote it somehow, get traffic to it, organic traffic from your website, paid traffic from Facebook, point to a dedicated page or a dedicated opt-in form, and then thank, confirm, and move to an instant donation page, ask. And what's interesting is we've done more and more testing around this. There is a direct correlation to perceived value and likelihood to becoming a donor. So something like a petition, low perceived value versus an online course, a lot higher perceived value, directly correlates to the likelihood of that person immediately becoming a donor. Kind of interesting. So we found a few organizations, about 10% of organizations tried this approach, but it varied in success. You can't just throw a donate button on a confirmation page and expect donations. So here's two different examples, one from the UK and one from the US, trying to use this approach, and we'll kind of use them both as examples. So what they both do is, again, thank you for signing up and communicate something like, you know, check your inbox, you'll receive the monthly newsletter. They're saying you did the right thing, you're on the right track. But then here's where I want to highlight where the two pages really start to differ. One is on the left here, the UK. Listen to this call to action. Please click on the link below if you'd like to donate to charity. That's it. That's their only real ask. And then in that same sentence, they say, you can also raise money for us by signing up to an event. So calling us to do another action while they're asking us to click a button below, versus the US example, your involvement shows the great compassion you have for the poor. The best way to assist those in desperate need is by sending generous donation today. Children like Maggie, pictured right, need your help. Please don't hesitate. Hungry children are depending on you. So again, if you're talking about value force, appeal, exclusivity, clarity, why would you want to do that? There's a lot more reason on the right versus the left. And there's also another conflicting call to action. So now we've seen these different tests in our research library. In this organization, you can see on the treatment here, A had a more value proposition instead of just the short little bit that's on the left. And then instead of a button, they actually put the full form on the page as well to reduce a step in the giving experience. And by communicating more clearly why a donation was needed and by removing a step and going right to the form, they saw a 350% increase in donations by taking that approach. So if you want to try that approach, move to an instant donation, those are the type of ingredients that you need to try to have some success. But the biggest thing is you probably need a dedicated landing page for tracking and to move to some action. Even if it's not give, what else can someone do? They just said, I'm interested in your cause. I'm on your site. I've already taken a small action. And 7 times out of 10, there was nothing for us to do. So if we kind of put this together in a little case study of an email sign-up experience, this one's going to come from France. First, we have to find it. So here we had to scroll. There it is at the very, very, very bottom. So are there some things that they can do to make it easier to see the offer? So for example, could they use this little slider as maybe they're scrolling down, or maybe a pop-up as we get 70% of the way to the page, or have been on the homepage for 5 seconds or something like that? Only about 20% of organizations in this study used a pop-up. And we found when they're used correctly in the right context, it can be really, really helpful to get generate email signups instead of making people go all the way to the bottom or hunt and dig. The other thing, again, look at the offer. Is it appealing? Is it exclusive? Probably not, and probably not. So could they do some other offer? This is a headline of a blog post on their site that just has human rights around the world, a look at 2019. Could they take that blog post, turn it into a PDF, and use it as an ebook offer? I could almost guarantee you they'll get more email signups using this approach than that unappealing, unexclusive newsletter. Now, they had a 2-step where you fill out that form and then you go to this page. They didn't expand on the offer at all. You could select some different options, although, you know, frequency and types of updates, although it was still a little bit unclear. You had to put in your email again, even though you'd already put it in, so not a great user experience. And they required title, something that's very unique to France. The language alone has a lot of masculine, feminine, so they need to know, are you masculine or feminine or other, to communicate. And then they also required postal code, but you don't need my postal code for me to sign up for your email. So potentially we could, A, kind of remove distractions here. If we want people to fill out the form, let's not give them something else to do. This image with the balloons, I don't know if it's adding much value. Can you remove it? Can you expand on what I'm going to get or why I should sign up with you? Please use my email that I've already given you. Ideally, you could pass it through and then only require or show required fields or information that you actually need. Finally, you get to the confirmation page, and hopefully you can see there's not much for us to do. So they confirmed it. They had a message on privacy. That was about it. Nothing else for us to do. And you can still see that that pop-up slider is still around asking for me to put in my email. So same thing, moving to action. Is there something we can do? Maybe get rid of the image, talk about what I can expect, how the email's on the way, how I'm joining the cause, something of value that acknowledges what I did, and then some action for me to take. There's nothing here for me to do, and please get rid of this pop-up slider type of thing. So that's how we can kind of look at the email sign-up experience. Hopefully you have a bunch of little ideas through that. So that was the email sign-up. Then we also made these donations. So again, let's kind of like step into the shoes of the researcher. We have to assess donation pages, and we're trying to figure out how strong the reason to give is on their donation page. So which of these three options are you most likely to give to? So here's option A. What you're about to do could change a child's life forever. Option B, your donation gives you closeness. With your donation, you help families of seriously ill children. You will, of course, receive a donation receipt from us that documents your commitment to McDonald's Children's Aid. Give closeness. Or option C, together against the corona crisis. We haven't faced a global crisis like this since the Second World War, and it impacts us all. Keep your distance and stay indoors, they say, and yet we are more connected than ever. Heartwarming initiatives strengthen us in the belief that we can do anything together. This crisis is particularly hard on people who are already in need of emergency help and protection. How do you keep a distance of 1.5 meters in a crowded refugee camp? How can you be in a hospital in northern Syria and provide medical care where there are air raids? You can help reduce the impact of the coronavirus worldwide. With your help, we can install soap and hand wash stations and scale up water supplies, and then actually expands to say what 35 euros, 50 euros, 75 euros do. So which of these are you most likely to give to? Or from weak to strong, how would you rate the reasons to give on this page? That's what we had to try and do when we analyzed these donation pages, and these are real donation pages from Mexico, Germany, and the Netherlands. And how we ended up scoring these was kind of correlated to how much copy there was, but it was kind of a weak to a somewhat strong to a strong reason to give in terms of how do I know that my donation is needed and what it will do. So that's just a little snapshot into some of the examples in the research side of things. But in the end, we found that there's only 6 out of 10 organizations did not have a strong reason to give. So only 4 out of 10 actually did. So we look at the breakdown across the countries. You can see that the United States here is like right dead smack on the global average. Canada is slightly above. And again, the United Kingdom is kind of the leader in terms of a strong value proposition, as opposed to say Germany and France, which were a little bit lower. So again, the question is, well, why? Why did those countries or why did those organizations outperform others? Again, we see a similar pattern here where 3 in 10 organizations in the globe that we studied had 0 copy at all. We call those naked donation pages. Nothing, just form. Form is all cost and no value. 4 out of 10 organizations use more than 4 sentences. So very few organizations are actually using copy again to communicate why someone needs to do something. And again, you might be saying more copy on a donation page. We don't need that. Beg to differ. So for example, here's one experiment. We're adding 2 lines to add in a little bit of extra context about why a donation is needed. Helped increase donations 28%. This is a little bit more extreme example where they actually added like 5 short paragraphs or so. So again, talk about appeal, exclusivity, clarity, and the other factor in this is credibility. Why should I believe or trust you? You have to use some copy. They used 5 paragraphs and saw 150% increase in donations. And you might be thinking that by the time people reach a donation page, they've made up their mind and they know what they want to do. That's not entirely true. We still have an opportunity to influence the type of gift, how generous they are, and even the likelihood of them giving throughout the whole process. This is an experiment where these kind of 2 lines of copy under the donate button. So they've already gone through and selected the amount, personal information, credit card details, 2 lines under the button, very end of the process, 31% increase in donor conversion. It's not just about using copy, right? You have to appeal to why would they want to? Is it exclusive? Why should they trust you? And is it clear? not just once, but throughout the entire giving process, right? We have to function, we have to look at credibility, clarity, appeal, and exclusivity. So again, if you jump back into the researcher and if you kind of looked at these examples again, maybe this is the lens you can look through, you know, change a child's life. Maybe that's appealing, maybe it's a little bit more clear. You know, this one, give closeness, maybe it's lost in translation, but it seems quite vague. You help families of seriously ill children. That's very clear. I know what that donation is doing. You know, you get a donation receipt, it's somewhat valuable, but you know, every charity in the world can basically offer that. Versus this one, right, which has, you know, the problem and the unique problem facing refugees, how you can help, and a specific breakdown. So more than anything, what we look for is it just clear with what my donation will do? Again, the UK was kind of leading the way here in 2 examples of their donation pages. It's interesting, like different format, different layout. Probably don't like personally either of those layouts or would suggest different, but they do the main thing, have a reason to give, pretty well because they use some copy on their page to explain why a donation is needed. If you want people to do anything in life, let alone make a donation, they need a reason to do so. To give people a reason, you have to use at least some copy, more likely more copy than you might even think, to provide that clear reason. Hopefully you can tap on elements like appeal, credibility, and exclusivity as well. All right. So that's the kind of like generate the desire, have people understand the value, but then there's also the giving experience itself. And one way that you can improve the likelihood of someone completing a gift is removing unnecessary friction, form fields, distracting links, and steps in the process. So friction, we can define as the psychological resistance. So it's sometimes physical, the actual number of clicks and steps, but often it's in the mind of the donor, the psychological resistance that your visitors experience when trying to complete an action. It is a conversion killer. When we looked at the different types of friction that we analyze and capture and added it all up, we found that 95% of organizations in this study had at least some element of friction proven to hurt conversion rates, which means there's only 5% of donation pages that we analyzed that were kind of like frictionless or had a smooth, streamlined giving experience. 5%. Everybody can improve here. So again, why? What led to this? Well, 7 out of 10 organizations required non-essential information. So this is actually much, much, much lower in the US. The US was the lowest. Only about 30% of US organizations required non-essential information. And this was a pretty clear divide between like European countries and then North American countries and Australia was how much information was required. So that was kind of interesting. There's also some legal issues wrapped up in that as well. But what we mean by non-essential information are these types of things. You know, title, Mr. and Mrs. You don't have to know that to make a gift. Phone number, you don't have to have my phone number to make a gift. CAPTCHA, you can avoid it. Birthdays, you don't need to know my birthday to make a gift. Gender, address, city, right? Some of these ID number was up there a lot. So these are the things that people were requiring donors to input information in order to complete a gift. Most often it was title. Again, it's most common in France and Germany. It's not that common in the US. 30% around the globe required phone. It was only about 15% in the US, and 8% required the birthday. Still can't figure out why so many people were asking for birthdays. But phone is one that we want to highlight because it's just one example that we have of requiring non-essential information and how it can decrease the likelihood of someone giving. So in this case, they required, again, keyword required, not optional, required cell phone. In doing so, they lost 42% of donors from that page compared to the other form that did not have that. So the more sensitive and personal and sacred the information is that you're requiring, the bigger this decrease is going to be. And so someone's cell phone is actually, you know, fairly sacred. We found that making it optional, no difference. People who are okay with you having it will give it. People who don't want you to have it won't. And that's generally our baseline suggestion. But the idea here is unrequired, non-essential information. If it's not needed, do you really need to require it? We found 6 in 10 organizations had distracting links, and 3 out of 10 had competing calls to action. So distracting links could be something like this in the navigation. Should be a simple thing like, get them out of here. In this case, it was a pretty extreme result on a fairly small sample, but 195% increase in donations. Just they're on the donation page. Their intent is to give. Remove all these distractions and barriers and let them complete the donation. And then are there other calls to action? This is where it's probably even more damaging, because not only are you distracting, you're kind of intentionally asking them to do something else. It's what we call confusion friction. And it was surprisingly high in Australia, where over 53% of the pages had competing calls to action on them, which was kind of interesting. So here's a couple examples from Australia of what distractions and a distraction-free kind of experience looks like. But up here you can see up top, right, they got all these navigation items. They have the Donate Now button, which links you back to this page. And this isn't probably a big thing, but the little thing of just even that cookie crumb link is one more link that can take me back or out. Then at the bottom, they have social media, and in the footer, they have sign up for newsletter. Now, hopefully the donor wouldn't see it, but there's no need to have that on the page. Versus something like this from the Nature Conservancy in Australia. This is what you see, this is what you get. The only thing you can really do on this page is go and complete your donation. This is what a limiting distraction and confusion friction can look like. And then finally, we found that half of organizations had 2 or more full pages or full steps in the donation process outside of the homepage. So what that can look like is this is actually an experiment that was ran in our library, where the old form of giving, the old process looked like this. You know, step 1, choose your amount. Step 2, you had to confirm and add to checkout. Step 3, you put in some of your information. And step 4, you had to put in your credit card information. In the treatment, they said, let's just have one step. You just do that all in one step. Choose your amount, put in your information. They did some other changes like remove distractions and things like that. And saw an 18% increase in donations by going from 4 kind of convoluted steps to 1 streamlined step. And what's interesting when you kind of peel back the layer on this experiment is they had a 64% increase on mobile devices. So when we look at the user experience or the donation experience on mobile, any little bit of friction isn't just like worse, it's compounded, right? If you've got 4 steps on a mobile device, it feels like 100, you know? People are moving quicker and things like that. So any friction experienced on a mobile device not only is worse, it's much, much worse. And steps is one of them. So when we looked at, you know, steps across the world, which kind of sounds like a, you know, charity where we like hold hands and like walk for peace. It's not. We looked at steps in a donation page process around the world. The UK was surprisingly high. 86% had more than 2 full pages or 2 full steps in the giving experience. The US was right around like 50, 45. So again, it's probably too high. It's below the global average, but it was pretty high. France was the best, and the UK was the worst. So they can kind of fight over it over the channel. So what if you can't remove these steps? Like what if you're like, man, we've got this crappy donation tool that has like a bajillion steps. One thing that you might be able to do is use something like a sticky bar or a sticker banner, either in like Unbounce or maybe even Google Optimize, where you can kind of put this within the giving experience. This is what this organization did. They had a multi-step checkout because they're a heavy child sponsorship program. And they were wondering like, man, is this really hurting our individual single donations? So they tested a bunch of these little sticky messages, you know, a testimonial from a donor, a testimonial from a child sponsor, an impact report. And across all those different sticky banners that were shown throughout all the different steps, just by having that value proposition present, they saw a 14% increase in donations. So again, value, why should I give, is more important than a lot of the friction. If you have a friction-filled donor experience, you need to communicate more value throughout. That's a way to offset it. And ideally, you can do both. More value, less cost, less friction. One thing that we're actually just launching this week, next week, is a tool that we've been working on for the past few months, actually, with Fundraise Up, which does integrate with Salesforce. So there's some, you know, synergy there. It's a donation page friction tool where you can go through, make a donation to yourself, similar to the methodology that we use, answer 25 different questions, and we will score your donation page based off friction and benchmark you against other organizations. And you'll also get a report that you can do. So free assessment, donationpagefriction.com. And then in a few months, we're gonna use all these responses and dive deeper into what are the specific types of donation page friction that are hurting nonprofits and organizations. All right. So that's number 5, remove unnecessary form fields, distracting links, and steps from the online giving process. 6, focus more on recurring giving with easy ways to make a monthly gift and clear reasons why. You can see an emerging trend here about clear reasons why. Recurring donors worth 5 times more in a year, 10 times more over their lifetime. Hugely, hugely, hugely important to growing fundraising. 1 out of 10 organizations did not have any way to accept a recurring gift. So small amount, probably still too big. Beyond that, only 2 out of 10 organizations provided a specific reason why we should make a monthly gift, or 8 out of 10 didn't. And so that's extremely low in Germany, where like 1 out of 50 provided a reason. In the United States and Canada, we're a little bit on the higher end there. And here's what we mean by a reason to give monthly. It could just be something like this, where in Australia they said $25 a month a year can conserve 3,000 hectares of habitat for the spectacular Gouldian finch. It's just this simple idea of what a donation per month could do. It's kind of this quantifiable impact statement. It could be something like this: Je donne tous les mois pour être chaque jour acteur du changement. I just give every single month to be an actor of change, right? Or something like this, where they actually take a little bit more copy and text to say, here's what a monthly donation can actually do. These are all different little ways to communicate value about why you should make a monthly gift. And again, we've seen this work on the experiment side, where this organization took a little bit of time here in this did you know box when you make a monthly gift instead of a one-time gift. So very clearly trying to answer the reason why. And they ended up seeing a 48% increase in new recurring donors. I want to highlight new. There's 2 main splits that we'll often see when we kind of peel back the layer on experiments. One is new versus return visitors, or new donors versus return donors, and then by device. Those are the 3 main things when you kind of analyze different experiments. So anytime you run an experiment like this, you should be looking at a bunch of different segments, but for sure new versus returning, loyal versus new donors, and by device. In this case, this helped new donors understand why they should make a monthly gift. Something that more and more and more people are doing. First-time recurring digital donors are growing like crazy, 86% in the past 5 years. More and more people are looking to do that, so give them a reason. The other thing you could test is defaulting to a monthly gift, and ideally in kind of a subtle way. This is something that only 17% of organizations did globally, and we saw some pretty big variance. So a country like the Netherlands, 40% of organizations in the Netherlands default people into a monthly gift, versus in the United States, it's more like 10, 15%. 72% of the time, the US is defaulting to a one-time gift. So pretty big difference in approach. And so what we've learned through, again, testing, is that there's something kind of negative about checkboxes. If they're checked, it feels like work. If they're pre-checked for you, it kind of feels aggressive. And so what we found in testing is this tabbed layout, where you open it up on a certain layout, like monthly gifts, is a more subtle way to kind of default someone in, and they can easily click single gift. And it works better than just forcing someone to check a box. In this case, 367% increase in recurring gifts. And the element that this is tapping into is this behavioral economics concept called status quo bias, where if something's pre-selected for us or chosen already, we're more likely to keep it selected. This is also why when you run this test, or if you test this, you got to look at how many folks canceled their recurring donation immediately after, because you'd be surprised how many people make a monthly gift and don't actually know that they made a monthly gift. Another reason to communicate, you're making a monthly gift, here's why it's important. You should get fewer cancellations on the back end. And then try suggesting the suggested gift array with a lower amount. So this is one experiment. We have a few different ones very specific to recurring, where by starting the donation selection with a smaller number, we actually saw not only an increase in the total number of recurring donors, 125%, but no difference in average gifts. So what's happened is a lot of people maybe see $15 a month as the first number and go, oof, it's too expensive, I'm out. Versus 10, like, oh yeah, I could do 10, and then end up doing 20. On the webinar last month, Courtney shared an experiment where the value proposition asked for a $5 a month gift, and then they pre-selected, I think it was $15 on the next page, and found out, sure enough, more people gave $15. But because it started at 5, they were more likely to entertain the idea. It's this idea of kind of cognitive momentum moving forward. So we actually looked at all the gift array amounts, the first one, the pre-selected, and the highest. We captured them all. You can find it in the study, but doing an analysis isn't too useful because of the different currencies. So we actually converted all the currencies to USD and then compared that to the gross national income per capita of each country to try and compare apples to apples. And what's interesting is you can see countries like Brazil and Mexico, and again, very, very small samples, are starting their recurring gift arrays with a huge number relative to the rest of the world. Whereas a country like the Netherlands, which has a heavy focus on monthly giving, starts with a very small amount, which signifies maybe they've figured out something that our research is telling us in terms of starting the gift array to a slightly smaller amount. So those are some ways that we think you can focus more on recurring giving, providing a reason, and then providing some suggested donations. I'm going to actually skip ahead on this donation page case study and move into point number 7 so we can spend more time doing questions. Now we're starting to get into the email experience. This tip, send more cultivation emails in 14 days, and as time goes on. Only one country in the whole study sent more than 2 emails on average to us in the first 14 days. So why this is important is when we look at repeat donor behavior, especially here in the US, this data comes from the folks at Classy. The key takeaway here is people are a lot more likely to make a second gift or become a recurring donor a lot sooner than you probably think. So these first bits of communication and how we engage new donors and new subscribers is really, really critical. So again, it was actually the US was the only country. The US led the way in terms of average volume, total volume. The US sends a lot more emails than the rest of the world, but that's also true in the first 14 days, where they were the only ones to average more than 2 emails. So you might be saying, how do we do this? This is where something like a welcome series is hugely, hugely useful, right? Where you can set this up and kind of automate that process. So this is just one example of what a welcome series could look like, where you thank and welcome, you provide some get connected links, you provide an offer of some kind, ebook, download something of value. We often ask for replies back, you know, why did you give? What brought you here? What would you like to see more of? And then lead to maybe a solicitation ask. Although we've ran a few experiments where taking the solicitation ask out and just providing more content is actually a better way to do it. So in the study, it's hard to actually find in a automated way or a useful way who's doing a welcome series, but we did look at organizations that were sending more than 2 emails in 14 days. And we found a few examples in Canada, and this is what it looked like. So day 0, this is the email subscriber. My name's Nikita. Welcome to the email list. So glad you're here. Welcome to the community. A day after that, email goes out. Here's a story of impact. You can read Agnes's story. And then 3 days after sign up, they sent this, and the action was to go share this on Facebook in particular. You'd click that, it would open up Facebook, be preloaded, and you could share on behalf of this organization. Those are the 3 emails that they sent in the first 14 days as a clearly automated welcome series, which is something that any organization of any size should be able to do today with the types of tools that we have at our disposal. On the donor side, this is what it looked like. Day 0, receipt. What's interesting about this email is you open it up and it's all cost, all transaction, all receipt, but there's actually like a nice personal message from the executive director, which should probably be above the receipt. So, you know, Joel and Hope Mission, if you're listening, maybe flip that email around. Just perpetuating the stereotype that we Canadians know everyone, but I actually kind of do know Joel there. And 5 days after, right, they use thank you for your recent donation. So clearly using some automation and some segmentation to know I made a gift. They provided a story, and then at the end, they actually do ask for a reply. Hey, let us know why you made your donation and what you're interested in. And then 12 days, they sent another kind of impact story. And what's interesting about this one is they didn't use our name. So it's kind of like personal from the executive director. They used our name, and then they didn't use our name. So I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but that's how they approached a new donor welcome series. Now, I don't think there's like one way to do a welcome series, but the idea is front loading a bit of communication. We did a webinar last year. Courtney Gaines did one on the surprisingly simple secret to a successful, that's a lot of S's, email welcome series. You can check it out. It's a free webinar as well. So that's like the first little bit, but then over time, and we've seen this trend multiple times now when we've tracked, is as time goes on, fewer organizations are sending cultivation. 3 in 10 sent a cultivation email after 60 days. So we look at this, kind of looking at the online donor over time, the chart looks like this, and you can see the steep drop off. You get the receipt, maybe you get another cultivation email, and as time goes on, you get less and less cultivation. Fewer organizations are sending you cultivation. Same thing on the email subscriber. You get this welcome email perhaps, thanks, you're signed up. Over time, cultivation starts to wane. So you see both for the online donor and the email subscriber, cultivation kind of goes down over time in terms of who's doing it. And this really, really matters. One of my favorite experiments is looking at the impact of cultivation. And this organization found that they were sending a lot of asks and not a lot of cultivation. They said, let's send 1 more cultivation a week, where we just said, hey, this is a blog post you might be interested in. Tracked it over 3 months and found an 80% increase in engagement, opens and clicks, 8.1% increase in donors, people who gave, and a 21% increase in revenue. No more solicitations, no more asks, just an additional email saying, here's a resource you might be interested in, more engagement, more donors, more revenue. They actually did it for another 3 months and saw a 54% increase in engagement, 42% increase in revenue as well. So you might be saying like, well, how do they do this? Well, one thing is just do more cultivation. But in terms of like the format of these emails, what we see a lot is organizations do this huge kind of like long, tons of content email, right? There's like 17 things for you in this one email, but then they'll send you like one a month or one every 2 months or something like that. So maybe a little bit more like this, where the organization has 3 things in here and you could send it a little bit more frequently. Or maybe something like this, where there's just one thing in this email. Watch this video about the world of difference in Ubuntu in the Congo. And what our research would suggest is try moving in that direction. You know, if you're doing one huge email, can you split it into 2 smaller emails? If you're doing 2 smaller emails, can it be 3 or 4 even smaller emails? And then obviously monitor the engagement and look at, are we improving engagement rates, not just avoid unsubscribes? So in the end, when we looked at this kind of golden ratio of cultivation to solicitation, for every ask the email subscriber received, they got 1.4 cultivation emails versus the donor who received 0.9 cultivation, which means the donor is getting asked at a higher rate compared to cultivation than the email subscriber. And this is what we see typically as well. So again, when you kind of like look at the trend lines across the countries over the full 90 days, you can see that the US has high volume, but the Netherlands and the United Kingdom are the only 2 countries to send more cultivation than solicitation to the online donor. And then we actually kind of see the opposite for the email subscriber. Only Australia and Germany were the ones who asked more for the email subscriber as opposed to cultivated. So the idea here is, can you front load some cultivation and engagement, and can you make sure it doesn't drop off and make sure you're cultivating donors over time? Keep firing in those questions. We're getting there. We got one more key point for you here. How can you make emails more personal to subscribers and donors? You maybe have heard us say this before, people give to people, not email marketing machines, but it's kind of a high level summation of what our research suggests for email marketing. And two key things here. One is there's huge power in their name, huge power in their name. Dale Carnegie puts it this way: remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. And we've seen that in things like the subject line, a Christmas gift for you, Kevin, 22% increase in email opens. Or in an email, starting off an email with, hi, Jeff, as opposed to nothing, 270% increase in clicks. Or on one of those instant donation pages, instead of thank you, friends, it's thank you, Jeff, 83% increase in donations. It's an overly simplistic strategy in fundraising to just say you and your and use their name. But it's also a functional working strategy, or it puts you in the right direction to use their name. And yet, half the emails to our subscriber, no mention of their name at all. It's actually 42%. Canada was the most likely. Way to go. The United States was the least likely. There's a combination of things in here. A, the US has high volume, and often organizations aren't capturing the first name. You just need to put in your email address. If you don't have my name, you can't call me by name. You're missing out on all of that power. The suggestion is ask for at least their first name. We've seen no evidence to say that that actually reduces conversion rate. We actually have an experiment where asking for their name increased conversion, because then it felt like it's more personal, or they'll treat me more like a human. And then on the donor side, it goes up to 70%, but all of these organizations have our name. We gave it to you when we gave. And 30% of the emails we received to the online donor, we're still not using our name. So I don't know if it's a strategy thing, if it's a tool kind of mail merge thing. I don't know what's going on, but there's almost no reason or excuse to not use a donor's name in the emails. So if we're talking about cultivating, like, use their email, at least in the like dear or salutation. So there's power in using their name, and there's also power in your name, not your organization's name, your name, you who's watching, who's listening, by who you're sending emails from. Maybe not the organization, maybe it's you, your name, comma, organization, 38% increase in opens. Or maybe you can get rid of the comma altogether, organization versus person, 28% increase in email opens. And even who it's from, the CEO versus the VP. You can run this challenge in your office. And this time the VP won, 85% increase in opens, 150% increase in donations. Your name, individual name versus the organization, has power when it comes to email. Yet 70% of emails that we received came from the organization only. So again, here's the example of organization only. This is what it looks like, right? Just the org versus person, comma organization versus person only. Those are the three differences that we look for in the email. And if you look back to that Canadian email welcome series I showed you, you can see all these are person, person, person. Now it's comma organization in there, but they're personal, signed from a person. So that's one thing you can do is send and sign from an individual, but this personal nature includes design and tone within the email as well. So we looked at different design elements and added it up, and 99.9% of emails had some design element, which isn't maybe that counterintuitive or that shocking, except based on our research. And if you come to our workshops, this is what we basically teach you to do in terms of an email. This is what an optimized email looks like for the most part when it comes to fundraising. And yeah, that might be kind of you, and yeah, you might be saying, I can't do that. But this experiment, remove some design elements, 80% increase in clicks, 112% increase in donations. Now I might be saying, nah, but that doesn't apply to our vertical, not public radio, right? We did a research study with public radio. The KUW station in Seattle ran this experiment, removed the design, copy stayed the same, more clicks, more donations is what you care about in fundraising. Motivated clicks by removing design. Wow, that only works in the US, doesn't work in Italy, right? Well, we did a workshop on email fundraising in Spain for Save the Children. Save the Children Italy was there. Unfortunately, there was this explosion, kind of a gas station exploded in Yemen and actually killed 7 kids. And so they responded immediately to get word out to their donors and actually do an emergency response appeal to actually rebuild the infrastructure that was blown up. This is how they would normally send emails. Based off our workshop, this is what they sent, 300% increase in donations. Wow, that's only for fundraising, can't be for cultivation and newsletters. Well, big heavy design, remove all the design, 68% increase in clicks. You could have a lot of reasons as to why this maybe won't work. I don't know if you have any reasons to not test it. There's enough data and evidence, ours and others, to say this is the approach that works. And so when we look at these examples, cool cultivation, would this be better if it removed the design elements and was more personal? Neat welcome series, what if you removed the design elements and made it more personal? Cool donor series, what if you removed the design elements and made this more personal? How can you make emails more personal to subscribers and donors using their name, using your name, not just the organization, and removing some of those design elements? All right, so we're running up to time. I think we have some questions. Here are those 8 opportunities that I went over. And if you want to go deeper, we're actually going to share a bunch of this data with you. Salesforce has said, yeah, make it available. You can go in, filter by country, filter by industry, find an exact organization if you want, and see their donation pages and see their emails. Like we said, we're going to send you the slides and recording as well as the link to download this report tomorrow. And all this other stuff, resources, training, research, etc., you can find nextafter.com. All right, I was a little long, but not terribly long that I was worried about.
You made it. What time are we actually at? We got a whole minute for
1
questions.
minute for questions.
How about that? We'll stay on a little bit longer for questions. Typically, we try to cap it at around 2:15, so in about 15 minutes from now. But if you're on here and you're asking questions and you want answers, we're going to stay on for a little bit. So we have 12 questions in here, and then we had a bunch in the chat. So I was trying to write them down on my phone as well, so I can have it all here. We're going to jump right in. Mia is also here from Salesforce. If you have more Salesforce related questions, she can jump in and try to help on those. And then Mia, if you have feedback on these questions too, feel free to jump right in. But we're going to start right at the top. So Emily's asking about this. Do you have a recommendation on a payment processor? I know we talked about different payment solutions and things like that. She's saying our CRM has limitations on how our donation page looks, which means multiple pages with multiple steps. Any recommendations related to platforms, technology, things like that?
Yeah, so payment processor is different than a donation tool, right? Payment processors like IATS or Stripe that actually connects your bank account to your page. So that's a different question than donation tool.
Yes.
Okay, for donation tool, the two that we often recommend, Fundraise Up is a very different user experience. It's kind of widget style. They do a lot of testing and a lot of proof behind it. And then Raise Donors is another one that we'll often recommend. Really, really solid form. A few of these examples that we showed you is a Raise Donors example. Those are 2 platforms that we often will suggest to people.
Cool. Emily, if you've got more follow-up questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. I'm going to mark it answered. How about that? Stephanie Walker has a question. She's wondering, would it be appropriate to share a link for a job offering for a digital strategist at my company? I would count attended a NextAfter webinar is something important to have on a resume, which is cool. Stephanie, if you become a member, you take a course, we'll invite you to a Slack group where you can share some of that with other members of the NextAfter Institute, but we won't post that here. Question from Portia, getting into donation methods. Does having alternative donation methods on the donation page create more friction?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when we looked at like giving via bank and PayPal and things like that, we're looking at ways to give within the page or form itself. So there's a big difference between a ways to give page and your donate now page, right? On a ways to give page, here's how we accept Bitcoin. Here's how you can fundraise. Here's how you get gifts of stock. You can list all the different ways that you accept money. That's fine. What we're talking about on a donate now page is credit card and bank primarily. There are ways to incorporate PayPal into a form in a seamless way, but we found if you use PayPal, like I click PayPal and I'm in PayPal land, all those things about keeping the value proposition and changing the suggested gift array, all of those things get lost. So as long as it's integrated basically in your form, it doesn't add friction at all. If you're talking about, oh, you can give this way or this way or this way, yes, that does add friction. So like Apple Pay and Google Pay, especially on a mobile, no, it's in the form, you click it, you log in, it's better. Be careful, you don't always get the information, like donor information, they can withhold that. But that's like a seamless integration versus a click out and now I'm giving through third party. That is friction, yes.
It's great, thank you, helpful. A question from our friend Lourdes, did I pronounce that right? I think I pronounced that right. How do you issue tax receipts without an address? I think you have to have an address. However, I think the question is more around what type of information should you be including on a donation form?
Right, so when I was talking about removing address, that was in the context of an email sign up, right?
Gotcha.
You don't need their address for them to sign up for email. Almost all the time, you have to get their physical address to make an online gift. Fundraise Up actually has a way for people to donate without putting in their address, and it kind of involves stored payment processes and things like that. But yeah, you need an address in most countries to issue a tax receipt, and that's why you put it on your form and people fill it out. It's not a friction thing. That's required information.
Cool. That's a good clarification. So on the donation form, not on an email acquisition form.
Generally, yep.
Question from QREX Group, I believe our friend Yvonne, saying, and you touched on this somewhat, some cultures are more logic driven, others more visually driven. You know, how do we know that maybe the stripped down email without the visuals, without the videos is actually going to work across every culture, or do we?
Yeah, we don't know. That's it. I mean, this morning when I was doing the webinar in France, it's saying like, we don't have research and evidence in France, but what we know about fundraising and human behavior is that it's a very personal, emotional type of thing, and that the more personal an email can actually be, the more that it can have narrative structure. You know, those two things aren't necessarily overly cultural. Now, the type of story and like who the person is, perhaps, but I would venture that those types of concepts of it being more personal are fairly universal. I'd love to see evidence to the counter,
Sure,
which there's none. I've provided a decent amount of evidence for the positive, so that would be my starting point in saying, especially with design, unless you know design helps, remove it and work your way into design as opposed to starting with design and trying to work your way back. I don't know why we just decided to start there.
if you put that to the test, feel free to share it with us.
Yes,
we would love to see, I mean, examples either way. If you prove that like, yes, we should be using tons of images in this particular area of the world, we'd love to know that. That'd be super helpful and really insightful. So feel free to share those results with us if you put it to the test. Let's see, a question from Stephanie about the welcome series. I think some clarification around what you meant. She says, when you say taking the donation solicitation out of the welcome series, you're saying that's better. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so if you take the webinar on email welcome series, what we found is that the content offer to instant donation page that I walked through, we found that to be so effective that that's what a lot of welcome series do. To get donors, we don't ask them. We give them an ebook, we give them a course, we give them something to download or an action to take. And then, even though we have their email, they fill out the form to get it again. Then they go to the instant donation page, and then we have an ask there. We basically found for a lot of organizations, especially ones with a lot of content, that's a better route to getting a donation than doing good cultivation and asking within the welcome series. Yeah. That's what I mean by we've kind of figured out to not ask and we actually raise more. Yeah. There still is an ask, it's just not in the email.
Sure, that makes sense. Hopefully that's helpful. Stephanie, if you want further clarification, feel free to drop another question in there. We also have some other resources we can share around that strategy. All right, I'm getting into the unknown here. So here we go. Question from Krista. If our current email software doesn't have the option to create an automatic welcome stream, what do we do?
Change tools.
There we go. Simple answer. Any particular tools that you would recommend?
Yeah, it kind of depends. We're big HubSpot folks. I mean, that's what we use internally, and HubSpot has some really, really cool features around using like website data and behavior to like do trigger emails and things like that. But it's expensive and it's kind of more complicated. MailChimp's the one that we would normally suggest for folks who don't have, you know, big budget.
Yeah.
Really good tool, integrates really well, and there's more and more ways that you can actually use integrations to do even like user-based triggers within MailChimp. But MailChimp is often what we'll suggest, if not HubSpot.
Cool, super helpful. A clarification question around emails, as you're saying, you showed some big newsletters talking about breaking those down into smaller emails. Would those be in addition to still sending like a big monthly newsletter? Or
No.
does it replace?
Yeah, it would replace.
Okay.
Right. So the idea is, you know, we take all of our content and we jam it in one big email that we send once a month. Be saying split that out into an email every 2 weeks. Test it, and maybe you'll end up to do like a weekly email with 1 or 2 things as opposed to a monthly newsletter.
Sure.
So it's just, if you do 1, try 2. If you do 2, try 3 or 4. If you do 4, try 6 or 8. You know, like you can keep going. If you've got tons of content and it's valuable to your folks and they're engaged, then great. One of the worst things you can do is not communicate or go too long. If someone hasn't opened or clicked an email in about 6 months, they're basically dead. Their email is basically gone. So you're trying to stop people from getting to that point because it's really hard to get them back afterwards.
Yeah, maybe they're on a great vacation or something, but that's probably the rarity. This is more of a commentary than a question, but Neil would like you to know that your French pronunciation is great.
Merci beaucoup, Neil.
I love it. I love it. Okay, from Anonymous. Does not want this question attached to their name, but saying, do you see diminishing returns by always using the first name in the subject line?
Yeah, I think like anything, there's diminishing returns if you do it all the time, and particularly if all other organizations are doing it all the time. So, you know, this is always dangerous about suggesting tactics. This is why we use data to say very few people do this, so you should try it. And now if you do it all the time, yeah, there's a chance that your folks would wane. There's actually an experiment in our research library that maybe isn't public, but someone took the personalization like really, really far. So instead of like, hi, Jeff, they were like, hey, Jeff. And it actually had a decrease because it was like, chill out. And also like, no one talks like that. That's too aggressive. So it's like there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. But I'd say in general, I'd err more on the side of use their name, say you, personalize. It's probably hard to err that way as opposed to the other way.
Yeah, and your point about that, like saying Jeff 100 times in the preview text or something doesn't sound like a human.
Right, it's not authentic.
That is the point,
exactly.
is you have to find a way to like naturally weave it in to sound like a human being, which is harder to do than it sounds. Let's see, a question.
It's funny because we are humans.
Right.
It should be natural.
And the marketer has like trained the human out of us somehow.
Right.
It's kind of strange. Question from Isra about designs and actual photos. I'm not quite sure what the question is, so if you want a deeper answer there, feel free to clarify that question. That'd be great.
I know maybe one thing that jumped to mind is like, do you use like stock photos or like illustrations or like real photos from your organization? I think the 1 or 2 times for the most part where we've seen an email with a design or an element of design work, it's when image connected to the email copy is used in a supporting function. So if you're telling the story about, you know, I'll just use like Maggie for that example, right? Sure. Like, you know, Maggie has to walk 4 miles, she doesn't have water, and then you have a little image of Maggie that works in conjunction with the copy. We have seen that can work because it helps visualize. It's not a huge hero image, it's not a wheat field, it's not some artistic thing of Maggie, you know, carrying water or something like that. Supporting image, very directly connected to the copy. Those are the only times we've seen it really work.
That's a good point, good point. Let's see. I missed the part about asking for credit card versus PayPal. Is asking for a credit card better than PayPal? Do you want to recap that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, better is always tricky, and how it's implemented is the biggest thing. What we know, we don't know everything for sure. What we're confident in is if you have like a donate now button and then like, or give by PayPal, and you click give by PayPal and go into PayPal land, that's not as good. Sometimes you don't get the information, you can't control the value proposition, you can't suggest monthly, like you lose the donor experience. And a lot of people go like, oh, I have PayPal, I'm gonna click via PayPal. What if they forget their password and all those other things? If PayPal is like integrated into your form more easily, where it's just kind of like out, log in and back or something like that, more so like a Google Pay, Apple Pay kind of thing, then that can be a little bit better. We're just, anytime you go from your donation page out to anything, is a worry, is a concern.
Yeah, that makes sense. A question about just where to find more content. This is where on nextafter.com is the comparative info from your research. I believe you're talking about the experiments probably here, the control versus treatment. We had some questions about that in the chat. You can find a ton of different resources on our website. Nextafter.com/resources is probably the best place to go to find some more curated blogs and webinars that break down some of these experiments so you can see really what was tested and how it might apply to a larger principle. You can also go to our site, go to the research section, find these larger studies, as well as the full library of experiments. We're still cleaning some of that up. We launched a new website a month or so ago. Still some bugs to work out.
It's a whole big thing.
Yeah, don't ask.
Don't ask, yeah. But you can find them online.
You can find them, and soon, very soon, it'll be all cleaned up. Promise. Okay, question from Cassandra. We're getting to the bottom of the questions here. I have a question about minimum level of a donation ask online, not about the minimum recurring. Does the data show that a lower amount produces higher giving versus starting with a higher amount?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we looked at that. When you start with the highest amount first, we call it a reverse gift array. And what's interesting is it's only about like 20%, I believe, in the world do it. And by far, the US is more aggressive in using that than other countries. That's a very US-based strategy. And the logic somewhat makes sense where you're kind of anchoring, right? You start with 500 and people go, oh, that's too much. And then they go down the level and say, oh, I can give 250. We generally teach to go the opposite, to start lowest to highest, because we want people to see the first amount and go, oh yeah, I can give that. And then you pre-select or nudge up to something that's higher than your average gift. That's generally our stance. But if you do reverse, you'll probably get a lower conversion rate, but then you're wondering, can we offset the fewer donors with a higher generosity level? And that will vary from organization to organization. I know there's a few large organizations that definitely test that have a reverse array. So maybe for them, they figured that out, or they go, this is worth it to us. It's the riskier strategy.
Right.
And by default, what we suggest is always take the donor. I would take more donors and less money because I can email, I can cultivate, I can grow. If you don't have a donor, then it's hard to get donors. It's one of the hardest things.
Right.
So that's always the side that we err. As far as like how low goes too low, I don't think we have that type of research on one time. The start lower is very specific to recurring.
Sure, that makes sense. All right, we've got time for a few more of these questions. There's a question about how can we assist, I believe you pronounce this Belang. How can we assist you to become a pioneer of these fundraising methods? Probably the best place to start is if you go to courses.nextafter.com. You can dive into some courses that focus on these different areas, donation pages versus emails versus acquiring new donors, A/B testing, Google Analytics. There's a bunch of courses where you can dive into what we have learned actually works to increase giving and increase generosity.
And run and share experiments. I mean, we offer all the time, like if you're gonna run an experiment and log it and share it with us, we're happy to help. But the testing tool that we use is open source, so anyone can log it, or you can just email it to us in a Word doc and we'll upload it for you and put it in the library. Especially as we get more outside of, US and Canada to see what research is working, we definitely need help and partnerships.
For sure. This is a question that I don't know that I've seen before in our years of doing these webinars.
Ooh.
Which is interesting. So a question from Ralph. Of all of these examples, it looked like they were from existing long-running organizations. Do these tactics work for a new startup?
I see no reason why they wouldn't. Again, we're optimizing for humans, and humans give to startups and humans give to large organizations. I think the biggest difference that I've seen between startups and bigger organizations is often resourcing. So startups will often choose the cheapest, freest, simplest thing, and that often really limits what you can do in terms of email automation or customization, and it can actually hurt your ability to grow your own organization. So that's why being able to invest or knowing where to invest in like tools and infrastructure is really, really important. That's probably the biggest difference between like large established and younger. The flip side is large established often have like tons of hoops. They've got red tape and a bunch of logistics, and startups can like, oh, we'll just change our page tomorrow. There's a huge opportunity for like rate of learning and changing and being agile as opposed to some of these larger
testing, and you may need to really focus your testing on places where you get more traffic or be okay with a lower level of confidence. But I think you're in a great position if you are new to really learn a lot really fast.
Credibility would be another interesting thing. Older organizations typically say, we've been around for 80 years. And There can be a positive to that of like, look
Yeah.
at how stable we are. And so young organizations maybe need to use like quotes or testimonials from board members or donors to try and build trust.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Or get the GuideStar seal on there or the Charity Navigator to show we're trustworthy.
True.
Whereas old organizations don't have to do that as much. But again, that can become a weakness. Big organizations go, we've been around since, for 80 years and we've helped 6.8 million people. And you who's trying to get $50 is like,
That does not
I'm
compute.
nothing. I'm a drop in the ocean to you. I don't see how I make an impact. Whereas a startup, it's like, man, you're $50. We need it so bad, So again, it's positive and negatives.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, question from Kristen. What was the second donation platform you mentioned? Fundraise Up and
Raise donors.
Raise donors. Okay. Couple more. We're so close to the bottom of this. Let's see here. Question from Shannon. What are the downfalls to Blackbaud's Online Express and NXT in regards to functionality? I don't know if we're the right people to answer this question.
Well, you shouldn't ask us on a recorded webinar.
Shannon, send us an email.
I will say two things. One, when we talk about technology and why we like Fundraise Up and Raise Donors and Virtuous and Salesforce, et cetera, something that plays nicely with others is really, really key.
Yeah.
Integrations, if you can get data out, you can put it in dashboards, you can put it in other tools, you can do a lot, you can push it into Zapier and then into anything else. A closed system is going to be very challenging. I'll just leave it at that.
If you want more clarification, feel free to shoot us an email. All right. Question from Charlie. Is there a central place to share results from tests to discuss with peers? Oh, yes, there is.
Oh, you bet your socks there are.
We have a tool called Winston Knows. It's literally winstonknows.com. If you go there, you can create your own research library and start tracking A/B tests and experiments. That's a great way to log them. If you give us permission, we can actually put those in our public-facing library. And if you become a member of the NextAfter Institute, go to nextafter.com/membership. You can find out more. We'll invite you to a Slack group where you can actually have live conversations in Slack with other members and course takers on this growing community of.
It's cool seeing it kind of become
There's
more
some
active.
Conversation the other day, like people trying to share data about like how did we implement Give WP with Salesforce actually and integrate into WordPress, and it's very cool. So that's a great tool. If you become a member, it's a growing community where you can share some of those ideas and learnings. Let's mark that as answered. Question from Chris. Any quick tips on how to turn one-time donors into recurring givers?
Ask them to become recurring givers.
That is the big ticket.
That's the magic sauce.
If you haven't done it, just ask, and that will set you up for a while. There's a lot more we could say there.
Yeah, that's the
but yeah, check out our research and resources. We have some on recurring giving. Actually, another Salesforce study we did a couple years ago on recurring giving specifically. nextafter.com/research. You can find that study there. And Beleng says, thank you. You are very welcome. Two more.
Yes.
Can we do two more?
I got nothing to do. I'm done now.
All right, question from Emily. If we do some of our own A/B testing on our donation page, what's an ideal time frame to run it? Oh, and a clarification. I started doing some experimentation and then COVID came along. Does that change anything?
Yeah, I mean, obviously like pre or post COVID, like if for some reason you straddled like March 12th would be really interesting. But generally speaking on testing, if you're just getting into new tests, it'd be nice to run tests outside of like year end or like a really heavy period where you're maybe getting a lot of donations and you don't know if it's going to work for sure or not. That's probably one thing to keep in mind. And then a couple other like simple testing basics. One, like it needs to run for at least 7 days, like minimum to go like a week cycle and no more than 8 weeks. Once you get above 8 weeks, you're going to run into things like seasonality and being able to compare and contrast. There's also tools that will help you calculate like needed sample size. So if your donation page converts at 22%, which is the industry average, and you're hoping to get it up to like 28%, or you want to see that percentage of growth, this is how much traffic you normally get, it'll tell you, hey, you need this many visits to your page to, in theory, get a significant result. And it's just a guide to try to figure out how many page visits do we need. For a donation page, it's normally 1,000. You need 1,000 people to visit each donation page to have a chance of validating a test, again, within an 8-week period. Huge caveats and rules of thumb in there, but.
Okay, question from Loretta. This is out of my wheelhouse. What do you know about PAD in Canada? Anything? That ring any bells?
Pre-authorized debit.
Ooh, here we go.
Yeah.
So the question is, do you have insights into PAD? We offer it, but they need to mail it in.
Yeah, so that's different. That's a lot of monthly giving programs will try to get you to convert into PAD after you've given. And I know for like a lot of really large recurring giving programs, they spend time and money to get you to move from a credit card to your bank or through a physical form, because the transaction costs are so much cheaper. And a PAD or your bank account is tied to your bank account, not a credit card that can go expired, that can get lost. You can just, be like, I don't want any debt, and cut it up or whatever, right? So there are strategies to try and do that. That's why I'm saying if you can integrate a give by bank, not necessarily PAD in Canada, I don't think that's a thing, but there are ways to do direct giving via bank where you put in an account number, routing number, and confirm it in the form itself. So that right away you're set up to just direct deposit, basically just like payroll, through the giving. That's better. But there are strategies and ways, like in the welcome package or something, and the positioning could be around impact. Don't just say like, we want you to do this because it's cheaper.
Sure.
Some donors will do that, but you could position it more like to be the most cost-effective, high-impact donor possible, so that you can do the most good in the world. Would you consider? Again, people need a reason to do anything, so give them a reason to switch to PAD or something like that.
Very last question from Allison, wondering, someone gives a gift, how soon should you ask, or can you ask, for a recurring donation?
Yeah, it's impossible to know, impossible to say.
Yes.
What the data suggests is it's sooner than you think. And then the huge caveat is you have to thank, acknowledge, and respect the donor before you ask again. You could do that on the page. We've seen a recurring gift ask immediately after one-time gift, and 5% of people will do it. But it's thank you so much, Allison, for your donation. It's going to be put to work immediately to do X, Y, and Z. While you're here, would you consider becoming a monthly donor? It is the best way to save time and energy and make sure your donation goes as far as possible to achieve X, Y, and Z. If you would kindly consider doing that, please complete the form below. And again, you've acknowledged and respected the donor, tried to not treat them as like an ATM, but legitimately said, that thing that you just did is awesome. Here's how you can be even more awesome by doing this now.
Yeah.
So again, it's like, that's better to me than waiting 6 months and out of nowhere asking them to give again. I think that's more inappropriate of us as stewards and relationship builders with donors than kind of going through that cycle really quick and asking again.
Right. That makes sense. Well, thank you so much, Brady. Thank you so much, Mia, for being here as well. Thank you to Salesforce for putting this study together and sponsoring it and making this possible.
Yes.
Just looking through the chat, there's tons of great comments, just excited about this research, which is really cool. And we couldn't have done this without Salesforce, our partners in this research. And thank you to the 120 plus of you that have stuck around for an extra 23 minutes for.
Well, they maybe just like went to the washroom.
Well, maybe, but there's been lots of questions. So, okay, some things coming up next. Tomorrow morning, you will get an email with the recording, with links to slides, with a link to go be the first people to download this study, the whole report, get all 8 key takeaways and all the data and anything special that they can expect inside of that report. Anything you didn't share that they should really look for?
Yeah, one thing I didn't show is we have got country by country snapshots. So we take the global average, and then you'll see a little bar graph on this side, which is good, or on this side, which is bad, to the global average, which is kind of a cool like visual chart broken out by country within the report itself.
It's cool.
Yeah, it's cool. It's big. It's a big report.
So you can expect that in your inbox in the morning. Any parting words before we close down here?
No, just thank you so much for coming. Appreciate you taking all the time to be here with us.
All right. Well, thank you, Brady. Thank you, Mia. Thank you, Salesforce. Thank you to all of you for joining us for, again, an hour, 20 plus minutes to learn new ways to grow your fundraising. Best of luck to you. We're rooting for you, and we'll see you on the next webinar. So take care.